Today is publication day of the Thriving Talent book. I can hardly believe it. You can see the smile on my face. And if you've been here for a while, you'll have heard the solo episodes since the beginning of the year have all been related to the book. So covering the topics, the core themes that I talk about in the Thriving Talent book. For the next few weeks, I'm going to uncover a little bit about the behind the scenes of the writing and publishing and marketing of the book, the entire process that goes into getting the book out there. So definitely watch out for those. For today's episode, I'm going to focus very much on the what the book is actually about. So summarizing everything that I've talked about up to now, showing, if you're watching the video on YouTube, you'll see some visuals associated with the book and the framework that I use in the book. If you're listening, I'll try and make it as easy as possible to explain what it is. So the book came about because of experiences that I had at work. So early in my career, I had some really positive work experiences. And then later in my career, they were less than positive, let's say. So I had a couple of specific experiences where I didn't feel like I was really reaching my full potential at work. So I started asking those hard questions about self-blame, first of all. What could or should I have been doing differently? How could I have got myself into this situation? How can I make better decisions the next time? I was also seeking answers from a perspective, and at this time we'd no AI back in those days, so we probably did, but it wasn't definitely as ubiquitous as it is now. So I was asking, what could or should the HR team have been doing? You know, I thought it was the HR responsibility to make sure that people are all okay. I see now that it's everyone's responsibility, and leaders have a really crucial role in creating those conditions where people can do their best work. I also was asking, what should the leaders have been doing differently, you know, maybe in a different context from what HR should have been doing differently. So I asked those questions. I left my most recent corporate role and I went on and I did a master's in organizational behavior. And the research I did on that master's became the basis for what now is the Thriving Talent framework. And the framework has evolved over time and the name has even changed. So while I was writing the book, it was still called the Happier at Work framework. And I was writing the book and I kept talking about the Happier at Work framework, but in the Thriving Talent book, which was based entirely on the Happier at Work framework. So I made the executive decision to change the name of the framework. So the framework is now the Thriving Talent framework. And it has evolved over time. So through conversations on this podcast, through conversations that I've had with leaders, through the work that I do with organizations, and from my own reading and research that I do myself. And so the framework is this. And if you imagine, if you're listening rather than watching, if you imagine that it starts with the foundation of psychological safety. So we need to have psychological safety in place in order to execute across any of the pillars, the three pillars that I'm going to talk to you about now. The thing with psychological safety is we assume that we have it because when people don't speak up, we don't know any different. And the default generally is that we don't have psychological safety at work. And typically we think we have it when people are nice, or we think it means being nice and being comfortable, but that's not what psychological safety is about. And so in the book, I talk about what it is, what it isn't, how to get it, how to maintain it, how to make sure that we do have it, how to check whether you have it or not. So psychological safety is the foundation of the book. And then there are three pillars, and I'll say what the pillars are, and then I'll talk you through each one of those in a little bit more detail. So the first pillar is culture, workplace culture. And I talk about, well, how do leaders actually shape culture? What actually is culture? And how do we define it if it's quite intangible? It's more about the behaviors. How do we directly impact what that culture is? How do we know whether we have the culture we say we have versus the culture we would like to have? I talk about toxic cultures specifically. So what does a toxic culture look like, and how can we recover from a toxic culture? And oftentimes toxic cultures are unintentional. Like, we don't set out to create a toxic culture, and we don't want to work in a toxic culture, but there are some reasons that toxic cultures come about unintentionally. And so looking at that, the second pillar is drivers, and drivers are the motivators. So they're the things that make us get up in the morning and want to go to work. And I say want to go to work because when we feel motivated by the work that we do want to go to work and we do want to show up. And if you have been like me, you've been in situations where you really don't feel like going to work, or you're not motivated, or you don't feel challenged enough. This I was going to say this chapter, but what I really mean is this entire section addresses that. So the first chapter, there's 3 chapters in each of these pillars. The first chapter is looking at our needs at work, and that was what my master's research was all about, need satisfaction from I don't want to get too kind of academic here, but it's the self-determination theory. So self-determination theory is a theory of motivation. It looks at need satisfaction at work. And we each have 3 universal needs for autonomy, relatedness, and competence. But it's not about just satisfying those needs. It's about finding the balance. Then the second chapter is looking at the unique needs, because as individuals, we each have unique needs as well. It's not just about those 3 universal needs. And we need to make sure that those needs are satisfied. Now, when I talk about needs or drivers or motivators, it's from the perspective of leaders understanding themselves, but more so, how do we create the conditions and how do we create the environments where people can do their best work because their needs are satisfied, because they feel motivated to do that work. And then the third chapter in that, I couldn't not talk about money. So it's all about money and how if you pay people enough, that takes money off the table, and then you can focus more on the needs that I've talked about. The third pillar is capabilities. And when I first started writing this, it was all about thinking about our individual strengths. And I will share a little bit more about that writing process and how it clarified my thinking in those future episodes when I talk a little bit more when I talk in a little bit more detail about that process and how things kind of changed or solidified or clarified for me in that process. But when I first started thinking about this chapter, I was very much focused on strengths. I do talk about strengths, but I also talk about how that looks in the context of working in a team, for example. So you have different people with different strengths. How do you leverage that in a team? I also talk about the things that get in the way of us being able to do our best work. Things like busy work or meetings or too many emails. All of the things that we want to, all of the things that block us or get in the way, and what we can do to address those things. The final chapter is all about leadership. And when I look at leadership, I look at it from, again, this is something that kind of evolved over time. It was the feedback from my editors like, oh, it's not really living up to the rest of the book. Can you do something with it? You don't have to rewrite it all. So I didn't rewrite it all, but I rewrote a lot of this section. And I started to think, what is it that I want to get across here? And for me, it's, as leaders, we need to lead ourselves first. So we need to be the ones leading ourselves. And that means understanding ourselves, managing ourselves, understanding our impact on other people, wanting to be a more conscious leader, and what are the behaviors associated with that, being able to respond rather than react before we even think about what it means to lead other people. And so the chapter is divided into 2 main sections, one about leading ourselves and the second one about leading other people. And that's it. That is the layout of the book. And, it's been a long, hard slog to get here. I'm super proud. I'm also really nervous about putting my work out into the world to be judged by other people. But up to now, the feedback has been super positive. People are so supportive. They're really curious about the process, and I'm happy to share all of that as well. But if you haven't got the book yet, then there is still time. It's only going on publication today. If you have already purchased the book on pre-order, there are lots of bonuses coming your way. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. If you haven't got it yet, you can check out thrivingtalentbook.com. Wherever you get your books, check out the website thrivingtalentbook.com and you will see where to buy the book from there. Thank you so much for your support. If you do have any more questions, do feel free to reach out to me directly. podcast@happieratwork.ie.